Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing another one of my question and answer videos using questions direct from my patrons. It's been a long time since I've done one of these. I think the last one I did was last year. I'm supposed to do these every month and we are in May right now, so clearly I am not doing my job properly. But anyway, there's no better time to start catching up than right now, so I'm going to go ahead and try to get through some of these questions. Again, these come direct from my patrons over on Patreon. I usually send out a post every month or so, at least I used to, for asking questions, and then I also have a Discord server set up, so as those questions kind of come in more organically, I can add those to the list if I think it's something that I can share for value for everyone else watching this. These are going to be in no particular order. Well, they're in the order in which I received them, so these may kind of jump around a little bit in topic, but it is what it is. So the first one up is from Kyle, and the question is, what is your experience with red dots on handguns? He adds that he just bought a Holosun for his Canik SFX, and it is pretty slick. So, at the time that I got this question, I couldn't really answer it because I hadn't had a ton of experience with red dots on handguns. However, since then, I have reviewed the Ahrex Rec 01 Tactical Compact, which is a mouthful, just like a lot of the Canik models. And I had a Vortex red dot test alongside it, and I try to go into it with an open mind because I've obviously up until then only used iron sights with handguns, and I have thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds through iron sighted handguns. So I'd only put like maybe a mag or two through other red dotted handguns before, and they were okay, but I was kind of unconvinced. Definitely needed to win me over. I didn't really understand the applicability, if that's a word. Applicability. Put the emphasis on a different syllable. Anyway, however, I now, having done it, I see the merit. I'm not sure if the cost outweighs the benefit, but that's really going to be more of a question for you. So, really quick pros and cons. I'm going to try to do high points here just so that we can keep this video moving along. Pros of a red dot: faster, more accurate shots at longer distances, and for me, with a handgun, longer distances, I'll say is 15 yards and further. I personally noticed that within 10 yards, I didn't notice any sort of speed or accuracy difference between a red dot and no red dot. Now, part of that is because I've trained so much with irons that I can be very proficient and effective with just iron sights, but part of that is within that distance, it's all going to be pretty quick. Now, once I start pushing past, 10, 15 yards, especially, past 25 yards, that's where that red dot really comes in handy. And I have a theory as to why that is, and I think it holds water, but you can decide what you think for yourself. So for those of you who know your proper fundamentals, you know that when you're getting your sight picture, you want a hard front sight focus, which means your target is going to be a little bit blurry. Now that target's going to be progressively more and more blurry the further it gets away from you. So by having that red dot, it gives me the ability to have a target focus, which means that target is nice and clear and I have a much more precise point of aim on that target, especially if it's a low contrast target. So past 10, 15, especially at the 25 yards, I have a much easier time being faster and more accurate with a red dot than I do with just iron sights alone. Now, one of the other pros: you have better situational awareness, at least potentially, depending on how you're going to set up. What I mean by that is, if you are aimed in on a target and you are, aiming center mass, your sights, if it's a traditional configuration, are going to be cutting off half of that person's body. And usually the hands, the thing you want to pay most attention to, may or may not be below that line of sight. Now, if depending on your training, you might be able to work around that, no problem, but it is something to be aware of, that if you are sights on target, you are obscuring parts of their body, and in a lot of cases, some very important parts of their body. With a red dot, again, depending on how your gun is configured, you will have a much bigger field of view on that person. You're still going to be cutting off some of it, depending on how far they are, etc., but you are generally going to have a much better situational awareness of what they're doing with their hands, their body, all that stuff. So that is a pro that should be taken into account. Some of the cons: I don't like having to rely on something with a battery if I can avoid it. Now, I know there are some options out there that have a solar panel just as a backup, like the Holosun, and I think there might be one or two other ones out there, and I know there are ones with really, really good battery life, stuff like the RMR, stuff like the stuff from Aimpoint that's coming out with the Acro. Those are supposed to have really good battery life, so that's a great thing too. But you know, especially, it's usually not a problem if you can co-witness with your irons, but there are cases where people will completely remove their rear sight to put on a red dot. And if it's a defensive handgun, that's not my personal recommendation. I like having something there if the dot fails. Another con, depending on where it's located in relation to the ejection port, you can start dealing with, and this is going to vary depending on gun, you're going to start dealing with that red dot getting clouded by carbon buildup as it's coming out of that ejection port. Again, this is something that's not a super big deal because you really have to be putting hundreds of rounds through it before that becomes an issue. But it is something to be aware of, especially if you're taking a class. I found after a couple hundred rounds, it is now getting to the point where unless it's a nice, clear, bright day, I'm having a hard time clearly seeing my target. So something to consider. Another issue too is if it's in your holster, lint starts building up, there may or may not be visual obstructions on the glass. May not be a huge deal, but it is something to consider. And a lot of those red dots are basically built like a bucket, so it just holds all that stuff. Again, that depends on your own cleaning regimen, how well you stay on top of it. I know a lot of people, they put their gun in the holster and they take their gun off with inside the holster and they just never touch it. So something to consider. Something else that could be considered as a con is they're bigger and heavier. They're bigger and more expensive. They are heavier, but it's pretty negligible. So it may be harder to conceal. It may be harder to find a holster. And if you do find a holster, it's probably going to be more expensive. And then the dots themselves are really expensive. And personally, if you're in that price range or you're in that budgetary range where it's either I get a cheap gun with a red dot or a good gun without a red dot, get a good gun without a red dot. Again, your individual circumstances may vary where you don't have good eyesight and that red dot really makes a big difference. Then yeah, get a $350, $400 gun and put a red dot on it. But if you have good enough eyesight where you can be proficient with iron sights, get a $500, $600 gun that's going to be better suited for what you need it to do. So there's other stuff, but again, those are some of the high points. Again, weigh all those things for yourself and decide as to whether or not that's going to be a good idea for you. Another question here from Kyle is minimum velocities for 223, 556 for good performance. If you guys have seen, again, at this point in time, I didn't have good hard data to point to. I just had some anecdotal data. Now, if you have seen, I have done a video comparing some different barrel lengths and how they do in terminal ballistics as far as shooting into ballistic gel with a couple different types of bullets. And I will say, just to keep it simple here, he's asking velocities. I'm going to say barrel lengths, and then I'll touch on velocities. I would not go shorter than 10.3 for a 5.56. If we're talking 300 blackout, that's a totally separate thing. If we're talking 5.56, so 5.56, do not go below 10.3. And my personal preference is don't go shorter than 11.5. Just, you're getting a little bit extra velocity. Also, you're getting a little bit better dwell time. So you're going to have more inherent reliability in the system there. As far as what that translates to in velocities, try to keep it above 24-ish 100 feet per second. Once you're getting down to like 2,000 feet per second, which is a pretty common number for those 7.5-inch barrels, that bullet's lost all its effectiveness. And you might say, well, if I use a soft point, it'll be better. If I use a special ballistic tip, it'll be better. No, it won't. Unless there's some crazy whiz-bang cartridge that is specifically designed to work at those low velocities, it will not work. I used a soft point bullet through that 7.5-inch barrel. It ice picked through 24 inches of gel, zero expansion. There wasn't even a wound channel. All I could see was the entrance and the exit into the gel block. I did the same with the G2 Research Trident ammo, which is designed to expand. Zipped through all 24 inches, once again, zero wound channel. Now, I just stepped that up to an 11.5-inch barrel, so only, 4 inches longer than a 7.5. And immediately there was a huge difference. In that soft point, I'd have to look at the video again. You guys can reference that. I believe the soft point went 13 inches, and then the Trident went like 11 inches. So it went from ice picking all the way through with no wound channel to actually stopping at a reasonable distance and having a very good wound channel. That would only be better if I had even more velocity. So try to keep it above 2,400 feet per second and don't go below an 11.5 or 10.3 at the absolute shortest for 5.56, and that's assuming things are close up. If it's further away, you want even a longer barrel. All right, so from Dan, what is your favorite foreign milsurp? And this is going to depend. So, okay, lay some stuff out here. Whenever people ask about milsurps, it's the kind of thing where if you ask me a week from now, I might have a different answer. So I'm just going to preface with that this is reflecting of my current state of mind and could absolutely change in the very, very near future, even as I drive home. So part of this is going to depend on how you define a milsurp. If it's something that has been used by a foreign military and is now available in the U.S. market, which is a pretty broad definition, I'm going to say the AK-74. I'm a really, really big fan of that AK-74. I'm a huge fan of the cartridge. I'm a huge fan of the external ballistics. I'm a huge fan of how it shoots for the shooter, how it feels. Excellent, excellent cartridge, but that's a very, very modern thing. If we're pushing a little bit further back, I'm going to say either the HK91/G3/SETME or the FAL. I haven't gotten a whole ton of experience with the FAL, but I think those are cool. But again, that might be too modern for some of you guys to where it might not count as a milsurp. So if we're pushing even further back, I'm going to say the SKS. Just as far as a favorite shooter, not necessarily going to be the pinnacle of my collection, but it is a great shooter. I would say as far as my favorite foreign milsurp, as far as like World War II or before, I really, 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 really enjoy my Enfield rifles. So I have a number 4 Mark 1. That is a excellent rifle. It is by no means the most practical rifle, even as far as military surplus bolt actions go. In fact, I have here, let me grab something. Out here with me today, I happen to have this gorgeous K98. This is a Yugo Capture K98. I'd be hard pressed between this and an Enfield, but you know, the stripper clip feeding, the just super reliable action, the sights are kind of the biggest thing against it in the 5-round capacity. This is a gorgeous foreign milsurp, and one that I was very excited to add to my collection today, in fact. So those are really cool. I'm a really big fan of like that's not foreign. P17 is not foreign. I don't know. There's just so many good options out there. One that I don't have a ton of experience with and might end up being my favorite is the Swiss K31, but I would just need some more time with it. Hopefully, eventually, I'll add one of those to my collection. But again, it's really hard. Again, depends on how you define milsurps, but there's just so many good options out there, and a gorgeous rifle like this one, is a very good option to add to that list. All right, another one here from Dan is, what are your channel goals for 2019? Actually, you know what? I'm going to save this one for last, just because I feel like that'll be a good wrap-up. All right, the next one from Dan. How often do people recognize you in public, and what was your reaction the first time it happened? So, not very often, as may not be a surprise to you guys, because again, this is a very modestly sized channel. I have some videos that have done particularly well, but generally speaking, it's a very moderately sized channel. I don't get a whole ton of recognition for it, and that is a-okay with me. It still kind of makes me feel weird when it does happen. The first time I really recall it happening was at SHOT Show, which makes sense that that's where my audience is most likely going to be. And I was walking down one of the aisles, and I was a one-man crew that day. My friend who was helping me with equipment, who lives there in Vegas, he had school that day, so he wasn't with me. So I have, my tripod in one hand. I've got 2 mics hanging down for me. I got my recorder, my audio recorder. I'm just walking down the aisles, trying to get from one booth to another. I'm just kind of going down the aisles, and a guy walking towards me, sees me, and is like, "Oh, hey, man." And I'm thinking, okay, how do I know this guy? I don't recognize him, but where might I have met this guy before? Clearly, we must have met before, and I'm struggling to recognize this guy. And he comes up and he's like, "Hey, man, I love the channel. Great work." And that's when it kind of clicked, like, oh, okay, this guy just watches my channel. I've never met him before, which A, made me feel better that I didn't misremember somebody, but 2, it was like kind of, okay, whoa, what do I do in this situation? Because this is not something that I've ever had to deal with before. And it was kind of all over before I even really was caught up to speed. I would have been more than happy to take a picture with the guy, but again, it was all over before I'd even thought to offer that if he'd wanted to. And I don't even know is that something you offer? Because I feel like if it was me, I'd feel weird asking someone else for a picture, and I would feel weird saying, hey, do you want a picture with me? Because that just makes me sound like a conceited a-hole. But that being said, if you want to have a picture taken with me, I am more than happy to. It's just weird for me to offer that, and I'm sure weird for people to ask for that. So if you want to, definitely feel free to ask. But again, it doesn't happen too often, and I'm still getting used to it. I probably won't ever get used to it, but just throwing that out there. I thought that was a fun question that Dan wanted the answer to. In fact, Dan is the one that I bought that K98 from. Okay, from Eric. What training have you taken? What do you recommend? Anything you don't recommend, and why? So training I've taken. I've taken a bunch of training, but from only a few different sources. And I guess it also depends on what type of training we're talking about here. If you guys watch my channel, you guys have seen videos that I've done on a lot of the training I've done. There is a school that I took some classes from that actually did classes here at this range where I do my shooting at, which is how I learned about this place. And I actually worked for them as an instructor for about a year. That kind of ended, and you know, here I am now. So I did handgun, rifle, and shotgun training. At the time I took those classes, I thought it was the pinnacle of firearms training. I have since learned that that is absolutely not the case, but it is great teaching you how. I guess I should stay here. Sorry, I'm kind of scatterbrained. There's places that teach you how to shoot and places that teach you how to fight. That school was a place that just taught you the fundamentals of shooting. It's very, very good for someone who's getting into shooting to learn what are the skills I need to know. And it's also a good primer of, wow, I didn't realize how much I don't know. That being said, since then, I've taken a lot more advanced training through Spartan Training Concepts up in Hillsboro, Oregon. I've taken pretty much every single class they offer, their American Rifleman class, their defensive pistol class, active shooter classes, tactical medical classes. I've taken a lot of classes that they've hosted through like Tier Group with the man tracking class. And so much so to the point where I'm basically an adjunct instructor up there, and they have me come up to be a role player for their active shooter classes so they can focus on the students and know that the person who's opposing the students can kind of scale what they're doing to the student's ability level. I've also done a class with Dave Biggers called The Red Zone. That was a phenomenal class. It was one of the most valuable classes I've ever taken as far as a shooting class. Highly, highly, highly recommend it. He doesn't teach it very often. So when he does, you should definitely get on it. I've also done I've done a AR-15 Armorers course, if you want to count that. But yeah, so that's kind of some of the training I've taken. And I should say, I didn't say concealed handgun license because in my opinion, that is not training. It is about as far from training as possible. You learn things, but you don't learn as much as a lot of people think they learn in those classes. So what do I recommend taking training for? I recommend getting those fundamentals. A lot of people, the thing that I hate hearing the most is, oh, I grew up shooting. My grandpa taught me how to shoot, so I don't need to take a class. Maybe your grandpa was Jerry Michalik and you actually learned a lot of really, really awesome shooting skills and ability, but most likely not. And there's a big difference between knowing how to pull a trigger and knowing how to do it effectively and repeatably to having good effect on target in a quick and reasonable manner. So definitely take some sort of fundamentals training class. The NRA pistol course is not that, in my opinion. Take an actual structured course built to teach you the baby steps to getting you how to fight with a gun. I'll put it this way. If you're in a class and you have to clear malfunctions with your muzzle pointing down range the entire time, and you have to pretend like it's on a parallel surface to the ground the whole time, that's probably not a class teaching you how to fight. If the drill that they teach you for when your gun goes click instead of bang, if they teach you to stand there for 30 seconds before doing anything, that's not teaching you how to fight. So just throwing that out there, basically the NRA classes. There are some good higher level classes from what I understand, but that basic stuff is basic stuff. I highly recommend taking some sort of medical training. You are more likely to use your medical skills than your firearm skills, just because there's a lot of things that happen other than gunfights that people might need medical attention for. whether that be car accidents, workplace injuries, anything crazy like that. It is very, very important to know how to deal with that kind of stuff. Josh, the head guy up at Spartan Training Concepts, has saved multiple people's lives completely outside of any sort of war zone or firearms training, just coming up on like car accidents and stuff like that. So that is very, very valuable training to have. And also because, granted, I was in the Air Force, so I got as minimal of first aid training as possible, but still got some of that in there, learned how to apply a tourniquet, all that stuff. So I would hate to be in a situation where one of my loved ones faced a serious traumatic injury that I might have the skills to help them, but I've either gotten too rusty with it because I haven't kept up my training, or I don't have the tools on me, hence why I carry medical supplies on me all the time. So like I have this little kit that has a cat tourniquet, cat 7, H bandage, a little mini H compression bandage, and some gauze. That's not going to take care of everything under the sun, but it's a good start, and we'll deal with a lot of things that I might run into. And then I have like a little first aid kit with Band-Aids and Neosporin and stuff in the car, just because, again, I don't want to be in a situation where I could have saved someone but didn't, just because I didn't have the tools handy. And I know people will say you make a makeshift tourniquet. Look, whatever makes you happy, but take training. The other thing that I would really, really, really highly recommend is once you've gotten that fundamentals training down, take some force on force training. It's going to be hard to find. There's not many places who are willing to do it because it costs a lot. It costs a lot for insurance and all that stuff. But force on force training is some of the most valuable training you can get. For those of you martial artists out there, like if you do MMA or like BJJ or anything like that, any of those sparring martial arts, there's a reason that you look down on the non-sparring martial arts. I'm not going to name any names, but there's a lot of martial arts out there that are backed by some pretty famous action movie stars that have zero effect in reality, especially zero effect against a trained opponent. And that sparring is where that stuff gets fleshed out, because you might say, hey, my crouching tiger style is going to defeat some, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But then you actually get out there and spar, and next thing you know, they're behind your back choking you, and you don't even know how that happened. So sparring is where that stuff really gets fleshed out of what works and what doesn't. Like MMA, those matches are really where that stuff gets fleshed out. So consider force on force training the sparring of firearms training. That is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, in as safe of environment as possible. So, okay, I know how to put my sights on target, pull the trigger, all that stuff. But now I have someone shooting back at me. So maybe I don't want to stand in one spot, so maybe I want to be moving, but now that I'm moving, this thing that I was doing before, this special stance, I'm not in this special stance anymore, so how am I going to do this? Or, my breathing is totally shot. I was supposed to shoot at the top or bottom of every breath, but now my heart's pumping out of my chest and I'm holding my breath and I don't know what's going on anymore. That force on force training is going to be exceptionally valuable to people like that, because it's going to give you some stress inoculation. Like even me, I'd done thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds of firearms training before taking my first force on force class. And that first drill, even though it's just sims, it's basically Glocks but paintball, my heart was still pumping out of my chest the first time I ever did a drill. And I didn't hit squat the first time I went through a force on force scenario. And then I realized I'm not looking at my front sight. I completely ignored my front sight, and it showed. And being on the other end of it as the role player, being the bad guy in a lot of scenarios for a lot of classes, early on in the classes, students who are very good shooters don't hit me at all. And then by the end of the class, once they've kind of learned what they're doing wrong and learned what they need to work on and learned how to deal with the stress, now I'm getting lit up all the time. And like last time, I just got shot all over the place. So super undervalued training, but is some of the most effective training you can possibly get. Again, Spartan Training Concepts does that here in the Pacific Northwest. Definitely try to find other places that do that as well. Stuff I would recommend not training. Again, I don't know if there's such thing as bad training. There might be. Nothing's coming to my mind at the moment, but there is less valuable training where you think you're trained, but you're not. And stuff like the NRA Basic Pistol Course is a very good example of that. you might come at it thinking, okay, I know how to handle a gun, and that's just not true in my opinion. Okay. You know what? Here's something else I'm going to throw in there. YouTube is a very, very valuable resource nowadays, and a lot of courses have videos posted to their website, or people have done course videos for those classes where they kind of break things down. There's a lot of forums out there where former students have broken down those classes. Read those course reviews, see what those instructors are doing, because and if you're not super familiar with firearms training and you know someone who is, maybe send them a video like, hey, does this stuff look legit? Because there are some people who might sound like they know what they're doing, but then you watch a video and they say the best idea to deal with a gunfight when you're in your car is to get out, go into your back seat, go to the passenger side, open the door, hang underneath the passenger door in the back, shoot under the door, drop the gun, do a combat roll out, and then shoot from the prone. If you see someone doing a video like that, maybe don't take training from that person. Maybe there's a video that exists out there like that. Maybe not. There's a lot of stuff out there. So definitely try to find a lot of those third-party sources. Try to avoid things like Yelp or Facebook, because I can say from experience, I know there are places that will say, hey, if you give us a positive review for our class, we'll give you a free t-shirt or something like that. So just be careful. Try to find third-party sources as best you can, not necessarily that primary source. So just throwing that out there. But that's enough about training for now. So the last question, kind of going back to Dan, what are your channel goals for 2019? So we're already 5 months in to 2019. This was back in January, so should have addressed this back then. But my goals are still more or less the same. Basically, a couple of my goals, I hit 20,000 subscribers right at the beginning of the year, and that was a really, really cool thing just to kind of see the channel continue to grow. I would love to hit 30,000 by the end of this year, and I'm just shy of 23,000 right now. So I think that might be an achievable number depending on how much I'm able to put out videos now. That would be, again, not necessarily for my sake, but it does aid in being able to get things to test for the channel. Like right now I have a PSA AK-47 that I'm reviewing. I have a Century Arms Visca that I'm reviewing that may not have been offered to me to review if I didn't have the viewership there. That Henry rifle I'm reviewing, that may not have happened if I didn't have people like you guys watching my channel on a regular basis and making stuff like that happen. I don't want to make it sound like I'm in it to get free stuff, because a lot of that stuff is just going to be sold and then that money funneled right back into the channel. But it does give me things to test and continue to create content for you guys, and can continue to do so in as unbiased a way as possible, because I don't accept money to do reviews. It's just not the way I roll. And again, if I get a firearm in to review, this is actually the first time I've gotten like a firearm where they're like, here, this is yours now. Once I'm done with the review, it's probably most likely going to get sold, and then that money funneled right back into the channel to help fund other projects. So just FYI of how that stuff works. As far as other goals, I would like to try to get 100 videos out this year, and if I do 2 per week, there we are. And I kind of was lacking in the last couple weeks just because I started a new job at a gun store and just trying to get my schedule all sorted out. That kind of paused things for a little bit, but hopefully as this year continues, we'll be able to get a nice steady rhythm going out of at least 2 videos per week, and hopefully that'll continue. But again, you guys are the people that make that happen. So one of the ways to help, if you do feel so inclined, and if you've been watching 28-ish minutes into a video, hopefully you're inclined to help this channel grow. One of the best ways to do that is to just share these videos. I know a lot of people can't support financially on Patreon. Totally get it. But sharing those videos really does make a difference, especially when YouTube is actively shunning gun channels. I think at least 10% of my videos right now are demonetized, if not more. And they don't admit this, but I think previously demonetized videos still hold the codes to why they were demonetized. So I still think that they try to hide those. So by sharing those videos, it gets it in front of more people's eyes, and hopefully we can continue to get this channel to grow and have cool and new and interesting things to roll in front of the camera, and I can give as unbiased of an opinion on it as possible. So again, that's all I have for today. I have a lot more questions in the backlog, but those are the ones I was supposed to answer back in January. So if you guys enjoy this, definitely let me know. Again, if you want to ask these questions, these come direct from people over on Patreon. You can ask a question here, and I might, if I have time, be able to respond to you in a comment. But if you want a question that's going to be answered on camera like this, definitely head over to Patreon and do that. We also just recently set up a Discord server over there for $5 and above patrons, where we can interact on a more direct basis, especially if I have my phone on me, and if I'm not at work or anything like that, or at the range where I don't have cell reception. If I have my phone on me, I'm pretty good about responding pretty quick, and there's a lot of really knowledgeable people who support me on Patreon. So even if I don't have the answer to your question, there's a lot of guys in there who can give some really good, valuable information in there. So it's just a really cool place to kind of interact and be a more intimate community, I guess. I hate to use the word intimate, but here we are. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, again, other than ones you want answered in a video, go ahead and throw those in the comment section down below. I'll try to get back to you as quick as I can. If I don't respond on here, it gets to be a lot sometimes. You can always shoot me a message over on Facebook, Instagram, if you want. It's hard to see those because the alerts for people, it's weird. But definitely over on Patreon, I make a point to answer questions over there. But anyway, with all that said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.